the future of supply chain education with my guest, Nick Vyas. He is academic director of Master of Science in Global Supply Chain Management at the USC Marshall School of Business. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Robert.
Thanks for being with me. So I want to get a sense of how university supply chain programs have had to change over the past year in terms of what they teach and how they teach it. What are the big changes you've seen?
So I think let's start with the very first. I think the big catalyst of the change, and this is before COVID, which was the distance learning. We realized the globalization of supply chain. We had our student body becoming global, and not every student can afford to be in a physical classroom at all times. So we sort of had to adapt to this distance learning. Some programs did much better job than the other, but that was a one component that we had to integrate in higher education as to how do we engage student remotely and still provide the same experience.
Were you seeing success in distance learning even before the pandemic came? You saw the writing on the wall. You launched it beforehand. Did it seem like it was catching on?
Yes and no. Yes, in a sense that those programs that they started out, they were very successful. So the program that we started at USC was the first program went virtual, the distance learning. So we build infrastructure to support that, but to scale that up across the different universities and different programs, I don't think the distance learning was accepted as a mainstream medium by which the pedagogy and the learnings can be delivered effectively. At least that was the perception.
I wonder if it has a lot to do with the age of the person in question. I mean, being of a certain older age myself, I feel like there's still no substitution for being in a classroom with an instructor. But a number of other people, maybe younger people, have found it to be valuable to be in a remote situation. Is it all over the place as far as you're concerned, depending on how old someone is, how traditional they are, or what?
Well, I think so. Yes. So the age and the demographics and some of the physical interaction certainly plays a role into how the delivery of experience can be enhanced. However, I think the reality changed once we actually got exposed to the COVID. Our world today exists simply on a digital platform. So you think about now, 14 months into this pandemic that we're in, we're much more open, we're much more receptive to being comfortable with the virtual platforms, right? We interact, we create effective communications, we create effective learning modalities. So all of a sudden, I think there's a tremendous diffusion of learning curve of being able to gracefully accept the digital platform as a very effective ways to deliver the education.
I wonder if also instructors need to get better at doing it. With practice, they become better at speaking into a computer, maybe whereas they were uncomfortable with it before. Maybe they become better instructors with practice, and maybe the students become better with practice as well. As we get more accustomed to the technology, is that a possibility?
Well, I think virtual is not just turning your laptop on and just going on screen and just delivering the 3-hour lecture like you would have standing in front of the students, because you have to be really innovative in terms of how you design your curriculum, how you deliver your curriculum, how you engage students' interactions. So yes, from the faculty standpoint, you do have to adapt to this new way of life, and you have to be really mindful about making sure there's interactions, engagement, breakout rooms, discussion boards. Each of these different tools, you have to enhance those capabilities to really make it effective.
I wonder if you feel that that the people in the program in the last year, as job candidates for positions upon graduating and getting their degree, do you think they're being adequately prepared by online programs for a job in the private sector?
Oh, most definitely. I truly do not differentiate the modality, either being in person or virtual, to be any different in terms of the effectiveness of learning outcomes. I think this whole notion about a brick and mortar educational model needs to be sort of a challenged the way we did with the retail brick and mortar. We adopted online shopping, online retail. We
Mhm.
became omni-channel. Education is no different. It is a commodity. It is a institutions. They have capability to adapt to the innovative technologies and enhance the learning capabilities. So I draw a tremendous parallel between how we created a seamless experience on a virtual online platform. Delivery of educations can really adapt the same way.
Yeah. We've been talking of these last few minutes about changes in how you teach, but what about what you teach? Recent developments in supply chain and what the pandemic has brought, have the way in which the pandemic has brought the whole issue of supply chain management to the fore, the lessons that the private sector has learned. Has it altered in any way the curriculum of these programs?
So I think there is a fundamental shift that we as a higher education institutions have to adapt to it. I think there are the three key things that we need to look at what COVID is going to teach us in terms of the supply chain. Number one, globalization is here to stay. We are interconnected more so now as a human species than we ever were. So in spite of this massive disruptions we've witnessed, I think the global economy will continue to grow. That
Mhm.
being said, we have not taught the decoupling the resiliencies of supply chain. We didn't design our networks with that in mind. We talked about it. There are a lot of buzzwords we used, but we
Mhm.
never really created the redundant supply chain that is resilient, that is pivoted for any natural disasters or the pandemic. We will now have to really teach that in a part of core curriculum.
If anything, we did the exact opposite to redundant supply chains by emphasizing just in time and minimal inventories over the last 50 years. I mean, that must have been part of your lessons all that time. Are you now looking back and going, I've got to modify that somehow?
Well, Robert, to that point, actually, I wrote a big blog on this, the lean not to be blamed for the
Mm.
disruption, right? Rather, it's a corporate greed that drove this, what we call the long string of linear supply chain.
Hmm.
So lean never said that you take away your buffer and safety stock. We always preached that. We always talked about efficiency with responsibility. But what happened is our profit minded, singular dimensions of cost efficiency driven mindset
Hmm.
created some of the problems we're currently facing. That being said, so that's one area. The second area is our supply chain evolution is getting 10 times rapid than we started out with. So you think about post 2000, right? Every 4 to 6 years, we were diffusing the evolutionary curve. We're now seeing that curve being diffused down to 2.5, 3 years. It's cut down by 50% of the life cycle
Hmm.
in terms of the digitization. And the simple reason being the disruption in COVID has taught us the digitization is now must for companies' survival. So
Yeah.
this digital transformation is a one big area, but curriculum has to focus on it. The use of AI and artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, IoT, all these emerging technologies, they
Hmm.
will be in the forefront of how we run the global trade, how we run the global supply chain. That's a number two. And
Hmm.
number three, which is the most important piece, doesn't matter the modality that we go, face to face, hybrid, virtual, experiential learning in our curriculum has to be integrated. Meaning, how do we take students and expose them by walking the entire life cycle of what are we teaching? So the experiential learning by reinforcing students and taking them to 2 or 3 or 4 different countries touch points where you're looking at the sourcing capabilities, looking at the manufacturing, looking
Hmm.
at the consolidation and then end customer. So imagine having that sort of a experiential learning that connects the dots beyond just the theoretical practices can really enhance the learning.
Yeah, it's such an important element too of risk management. And I know that there was a newfound awareness of risk before COVID-19 hit, but it's got to be first and foremost. It's got to be in your lesson plan now, the importance of incorporating risk management into every aspect of your supply chain and all the way up to the C-suite, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think what you will see now, the governance, corporate governance, to the policy governance at the government level, it will mandate companies to ensure that their supply chains are much more diversified, much more resilient. And by the
Mhm.
way, there'll be direct consequences for lack of discipline of following through with those initiatives.
Yeah. I wonder if you see a whole new wave of interest coming in about supply chain management in general, now that the general populace knows what supply chain is. Whether they like it or not, everyone's talking about supply chain, whereas before it was like, what the heck is that? Do you foresee much greater interest in programs such as yours, and will you have to prepare for that?
Absolutely. I think there's a tremendous need. I think we'll see over the next 10 years huge deficit in the supply chain professionals. They're trained,
Mhm.
they're educated, not only educated in terms of theoretical applications, but they know the practical applications and they know how to be a very productive member in a global trade and global economy by practicing the best in class practices within supply chain. So the demand will be high and the need for universities to train the students and next generation leaders will
Mhm.
be even great.
Nick Vyas of the University of Southern California Marshall School of Business. Thank you so much for sharing your views on the current state and future of supply chain education. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.